So this is a webinar on protecting workers from heat-related illness, and we're covering CPL 3-00-024 National Emphasis Program on Outdoor and Indoor Heat-Related Hazards. That is our new National Emphasis Program that VOSHA has adopted. And my name is Carl Hayden. I'm the VOSHA cast. My email is carl.hayden@vermont.gov, and Dan Whipple is the VOSHA manager. He's here to help answer any questions, and his is danwhipple@vermont.gov. And we are recording this, so you can review this later or have your invite people to go to our website and look at it if they need any help. And also at the end, Kyle, our communications person, will send you guys a link to that recording for your own purposes. So let's get started. Basically, OSHA is proposing this NEP and has adopted it. They started it in April that they're enforcing it, and we adopted it about a week ago on the 12th of June on a Sunday. And the reason for that is over the past decade or so, the statistics show about 815 workers or more have died, and about 70,000 have been injured. And that's just workers. That's not counting general population. A lot more people have died from heat-related illnesses in the general population than just workers. But OSHA, VOSHA only have jurisdiction over workers. This particular NEP is only dealing between the employer and the employee and making the employee safe at work. It covers both indoor and outdoor workers. It goes into effect anytime the heat index, and that's humidity and temperature, hit 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So it may be 70 outside, but the humidity is high, then it feels like 80, then the NEP is in effect. We would have the ability to stop, and such as right now when we stop for roofing guys that we see not properly protected, trenches that we need to examine, or cranes that we need to examine. So in this case, on hot days, we would have the ability to stop, talk to workers, see if there's a problem, and open an inspection. So one of the things the NEP wants to see is employers having an acclimatization plan for their workers. What OSHA has found in the statistics is about 3 out of 4 of the fatalities occur during the first week of a work, and that's in all kinds of workers. It's basically due to the fact that they're not used to working in the heat, and things go pretty badly in that week until people get adjusted to their amount of work that they need to do and the temperatures. And what OSHA is recommending in the NEP is using a 20% rule. The first day of work, you do 20% of the full intensity and up at 20% each day. We're going to be looking for some kind of plan from the employer on how to acclimate their workers to the heat. I've worked in the desert. I've worked in cheese making. Both of those are extremely hot industries. You can work in heat and you can work in a lot of heat. You just need to take the proper precautions. When I worked in the desert, it was routinely in the 90s and the 100. We worked early. We drank lots of water. We carried portable shade with us or hats. We wore lightweight clothing. When I worked for the cheese making company, it was routinely 95 or hotter in there while we make the cheese. You hydrate, you built up to working in there, but you can work in it every day as long as you're acclimated. And OSHA's intent is that the employer give their employees the time to acclimate to that job in the first week. So there should be something in their heat plan that allows for that. Employer needs to provide cool water. cool potable water to drink. It's already required in the OSHA standards to do this under 1910.141 and under 1926.51. Potable water is a requirement in the work site. So basically, this is nothing new, but we expect it to be done as part of this NEP. One of the questions I received pre this talk from an employer was who's responsible for providing the water, and that is, as always, the employer of the person being exposed is generally responsible for providing the water. In the case of a general contractor relationship on a work site, construction work site, the general contractor, we would expect them to either state to their subcontractors that they need to provide the water, or the general contractor makes that water available on site as well. But some provision needs to be there. So either GC tells the subs to bring their own water and make sure they do it, or the GC decides to provide it themselves if they have a good supply. Either way is fine with us, or both, just as long as there's water available. Ability, the NEP wants employers to be able to give their employees rest breaks. There isn't any set time for that. It's a judgment call. You're going to need to do a hazard analysis. You're going to need to look up things and decide which work rest regimen you want to use. There's a bunch of them out there. They all have their pluses and minuses. You need to sort of rate the amount of work that your guys are doing and gals are doing, and decide what kind of work rest schedule you need to give them when it's hot. And the hotter it gets, the more frequent they're going to need to drink, rest, that sort of thing. So it's a judgment call on your part based on how you analyze the hazard that you're exposing your workers to. You need to provide an area of shade or a cool area to cool down in. This could be a portable tent. This could be making sure there's a picnic table or something under some nice trees. It can be air conditioning in a room. I inspected one plant that was extremely hot, but their break room was cooled with air conditioning. They had a written plan at the time, way before this, that said, if it got this hot in the plant, they start cycling workers on break more frequently into the cool room and having people rest before going back out on the floor, because it did get quite hot there. But they had that plan in place. I was in there on a complaint that it was too hot, and literally they had planned for it. So it wasn't, as long as you're doing that as the employer and you plan for it, that's what we want to see. Ensure employees are dressed for the heat. So, tell your employees to wear lighter clothing, or if you provide a uniform, provide a lighter uniform in the summer with a wide brim hat, that kind of thing, to protect your worker. Either way is fine with us. Just make sure they're, not wearing super heavy stuff. Now, this may be a problem with PPE. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for years. We would wear basically plastic suits. And when it became hot, we would cycle in and out a lot more frequently. And it cut into work because getting in and out of the suits takes a while, but you can't be in that kind of thing for long periods of time when it's hot. Even with a supplied air hose blowing air into the suit, it still becomes extremely hot in there. Even wearing a cooling vest, we had these nice iced cooling vests you could wear. You still need to do the work rest, even though you're providing that to people, because it's even having all that cooling ability in that PPE, you're going to be stressing people. So you need to figure out how you want them resting, what they're going to do. You need to have we'd like to see a buddy system implemented. Don't, if it's a hot day, you have pair of workers up if you can, have them aware of the signs of heat and illness in each other. be aware of it in yourself as well. I, as a supervisor at the pharmaceutical company, would keep an eye on my employees. There were a couple of times I was paying more attention to them than myself, and I came a little close to being a heat casualty. So pay attention to yourself, pay attention to your workers, buddy up if possible, that kind of thing. And then the other thing we're expecting is have a plan. So you are working at a site, you need to have a plan for how you're going to get emergency response to your site, or what you're going to do. If you're an employer in, say, Essex County, where out in the, you're the giant maple syrup place in Essex County, you got guys out in the woods, it's hot. How are you getting, if one of them goes down for a heat injury, how are you going to get a response to them? And in this case, if it's not fairly quick, you need to have your guys prepared to do first aid in that time while you're waiting for a response, because it could be a while. And once you've gotten into a heat emergency, every minute is too long. So having to be you need to have a plan for if something goes wrong. You need to be able to say, okay, I'm in Williston, I'm about 2 blocks from the EMS guys. We don't really need to have a lot of extra stuff on hand. However, you might, depending on what the severity is. If the heat goes way up, you're going to want to have a lot of water on hand, a lot of ways to cool people down, that kind of thing. So it's a judgment call according to how hot it is. So nowadays, if we go back into more of another wave and masks become required again, checking on people, this is just a slide that says basically check a little closer when you're wearing masks. It's harder to tell what's going on. Talk to people, that sort of thing. People are now, at least in Vermont, some people are still wearing masks, some people aren't. If your coworker's wearing a mask, make sure you're talking to them to make sure they're not starting to show signs of losing it. They'll be, I'm going to go over some of the symptoms of heat illnesses shortly, but if they're starting to show signs, it may not be really visible until you start talking to them and they start talking a little funny about and answering questions weird. All right, so I'm going to go over some of the symptoms and types of heat illnesses out there. This is not a first aid class. You need to train your workers in first aid on this with either some sort of official training. So for Red Cross, National Safety Council, whoever you use for your first aid training, have them go over the heat illnesses and also the means of treatment that you'll use when you're training people for first aid. So this is just a general thing on heat illness symptoms. I'm not really going to go into treatment. You need to get your guys decide whether or not you need to provide first aid training. You do need to provide you do need to provide training in symptoms recognition to your employees so that they know when to call 911 if you're not going to provide first aid training itself. But I'm not going to go over the treatment part. So we recognize heat-related illnesses, or HRIs. Basically, there are 6 different kinds that we recognize, and I've listed them in relative from top to bottom. Top is the least to bottom getting to the worst. These can occur together and grade into each other. So while they're 6 distinct things, they're not always alone. So you could get heat rash and heat cramps at the same time or it could grade into rhabdomyolysis. And eventually, you can also jump very quickly between these and go from having heat cramps to having heat stroke in a few, very, very quickly. So being able to recognize the symptoms, being able to decide, I got to get Bob in the shade and get him drinking water, because Bob may not realize he's having problems. So you want your guys trained in recognition of the different types of heat illness that there is. Depending on where you are and your work situation, you will probably want to train in first aid on these things. You may not need to if you're close to first aid or first responder or EMTs, but in reality, I would recommend being trained on how to handle it, because every minute that you don't treat somebody or get them proper medical attention can lead to damage or death if it becomes severe. So first off, we got heat rash. It's frequently a red blotchy rash that may have clusters of small pimples or blisters. If it covers a large area, though, it's probably going to interfere with the regulation of the body's ability to regulate temperature. So a big heat rash is a bad sign. Little ones you can treat. It's usually, unless they're showing other signs of other types of illnesses, heat rash is the least problematic. It does, however, require treatment. And so like I said, it's a potential early sign of other illnesses. So blotchy red areas, small pimples, blisters, basically it's the least of them, but it also is a sign that things are getting bad. The next thing you come up to is heat cramps, which are usually the result of a temporary sodium or liquid imbalance while exposed to heavy work or exercise in a heat environment. So you get spasms and pain in the muscles and arms and legs and abdomen. That's heat cramps. And then you have syncope, heat syncope. Syncope is basically fainting. And it results when blood pools in the skin or lower parts of the body. It indicates a decreased flow of blood to the brain, and may happen when a worker is standing in one place for an extended period or suddenly moves from a sitting to a lying position. So you get dizzy, you get lightheaded, and you may actually have fainting. However, if an employee does faint, they have now lost consciousness, and that is a recordable, so that needs to be recorded. It also would be something I would call the 911 on as fast as possible. That's a scary situation. And it may not always be related to just heat. It could be other health effects that are going on. You could be having a diabetic emergency. You could be having a heart-based emergency. There's all kinds of things that it could also be. So if somebody faints or acts dizzy, that kind of thing, call an ambulance. Rhabdomyolysis is a breakdown of the muscle tissue, and it releases proteins into the blood, which can damage your kidneys and other organs. It comes along with heat cramps sometimes. So these are all gradational. So it's muscle cramps and pain, abnormally dark urine, weakness, and exercise intolerance. You don't really want this to happen to you, so keep an eye out for it. Now we're going to get into heat exhaustion. This is right up there with just before heat stroke. The skin becomes pale and cool or flushed. You get a headache. You have sweating, clammy skin. You got abdominal cramping, nausea, and vomiting. So you basically are getting a lot of the other symptoms of the other things all mixed in here. Weakness and lethargy, dizziness, confusion, elevated body temperature. This is bad. You need to take action. You may just need to do first aid, which you should, like I said, get training from one of the official first aid trainers, but you need to do something here. The next stage is heat stroke. This is deadly. Heat stroke is life-threatening and the most serious of the heat-related illnesses. It's a medical emergency. You need to call 911. Heat stroke is a central nervous system failure. The body loses the ability to regulate temperature completely. The ability to sweat is lost, so you get this dry skin. The heat regulating system is overwhelmed and the body temperature rises rapidly. So in my one heat fatality that I investigated, the gentleman's core temperature was still high after he'd passed away and gone to the morgue. It was still above, I believe, 104. Your body completely loses the ability to cool itself down in this case, and you really need to get help to them or have a plan in place for this on site when you're because when this happens, it's not an easy thing to deal with, or it's a bad situation. So heat stroke symptoms: skin is hot and dry, body temperature is high 104 plus, heart rate becomes rapid, sweating is usually absent, chills may be present, victim may be confused, dizzy, and might have slurred speech. The victim I was talking about was still able to answer questions when they started suspecting he had a problem, but he was still answering coherently until he finally, just before he collapsed, he started to answer weirdly. So it grades in various ways. Once you've gotten into this, you're in a real emergency. You need to get help quickly. Seizures or loss of consciousness are possible. So things to look for: abnormal thinking or behavior, slurred speech, seizures, death, loss of consciousness. These are all signs of heat problems. They're also signs of other health problems. So one, get your guys trained in recognizing these. Two, know that any of these things happening is not normal and you probably need to call 911. I would. Even if I was up to date on my first aid, I'd be calling 911 immediately, as well as trying to do first aid to help them out. So it's one of those things where you really don't want to be afraid to call 911. So I've noticed in my years of working that some employees are. Don't penalize your employees for erring on the side of safety. I always would rather have had my guys call somebody and it being not really necessary, rather than not calling it and it should have been done. So basically, take these actions: call 911 immediately, cool the worker right away with water and ice if you can, stay with the worker until help arrives. Those are for everything. Cool the worker, get them in the shade, get them drink water, give them ice packs, that kind of thing. Stay with the worker until help arrives. Don't leave people alone. You really need to stick with them, and basically try and cool them down the best you can until help arrives. All right, so watch for other signs. Other signs are headache or nausea, weakness or dizziness, heavy sweating or hot, dry skin, elevated body temperature, thirst, decreased urine output. All of those are signs of heat problems. They're also signs of other things as well. So the best thing is train your workers as best you can to recognize the symptoms, make sure they know what to do, make sure you guys have a plan on site, whether you're a manufacturing site, a restaurant, a construction site. Have a plan on how you're going to provide emergency, reaction to something bad happening as a health issue. Heat is the hazard we're talking about, but you should have a plan in place just in case something happens. What happens when one of your workers has a heart attack? it's basically the same thing. Do you have the ability to provide first aid, or do you, is emergency services going to get there in time? So you want to have a good plan in place. Here's something a lot of people don't realize. So you learn about your employer's responsibilities. You are responsible for making sure your employees are provided a workplace free of hazards that are likely to cause injury or death as an employer. This includes safety hazards like hot and humid conditions. So the general duty clause does apply. And the general duty clause, we in the OSHA world call it a 5A1 citation. It's basically a catch-all for anything we don't have a standard on. In this case, we would say if it was bad enough, we'd come in, start her investigation. We may issue a general duty clause citation, and in that we're going to show, okay, you guys were working at this amount of strenuous, however strenuous your job is, in this amount of heat for this amount of time, and you as the employer did not do anything to mitigate that. And this would be in the case of you're really not doing anything. More than likely, what we'll do is initially be issuing a lot of hazard alert letters saying, hey, you need a heat program. And this will be in the cases where you're doing something, but you need to do a little better. Also, as Dan just mentioned in the chat, OSHA is basically going to be coming out with an actual standard here, hopefully in the not too distant future, which will give you hard, fast things that you need to do to comply and be safe. Like all the other standards we have, they will be the minimum amount you need to do. So we're not sure exactly when it's coming out, but it's in the works. Let's see. All right. So again, this is we do have the national emphasis program on outdoor and indoor heat hazards. It establishes heat priority days when the heat index is expected to be 80 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. So if it gets to that, we may stop at your work site. You may see us, pull up and start talking to you, open up an investigation and say, start interviewing your workers about what you're doing for heat protection. We did adopt that on June 12th. And actually, if you cross into New Hampshire or some of the Fed states, it's been in effect since April 8th. All right, what should you do? This is a little review of what we've gone over. Employers should create a heat illness plan to protect workers from developing heat-related illnesses. This includes creating a heat illness plan to protect workers from heat illness. That means a written program. Now, if you're suddenly just realizing, hey, I don't have a plan, you can do this in an easy way and doing sort of a tailgate talk and writing down, okay, we came up with this little quick plan as an interim until we come up with something more official, and I'm going to make sure we have this tent over here, we have this cooler of water here, everybody's been made aware of what to do if people start feeling sick, and go over it. You can do a quick little plan. We would like to see a little more detailed later, but you can do basically what we would call a tailgate talk in the interim until you can get a better plan in place that you have in your official safety and health management system. We would like to see allowing new and returning workers to gradually increase workloads and take more frequent breaks as they acclimatize to the work. You absolutely have to provide water, rest, and shade ability for a cool space for your workers on days when it hits 80 or more in the heat index. Frequent monitoring of workers for signs of heat illness throughout the day. Basically, if you're the foreman, walk around, talk to people, make sure they're drinking, make sure they're looking all right, make sure they're answering your questions in a coherent manner. If they're not, get them help. Pair them up with somebody, have them watching each other. Vermont isn't historically, and Dan's typing something about that now on the screen, but Vermont is not historically a place that has a lot of heat illness, but it does happen. And we are having more frequent hot days. And if you've been watching the news, the rest of the country has been having heat waves. We can expect one of those to hit us at any time. It's imperative that you plan for it, because there will be days when you wish you had. Train your supervisors, train your workers in recognizing those symptoms, so they know when somebody needs to get basically either cooled down or an emergency call needs to be made. Plan for those heat emergencies. Know what your 911 response time is going to be at the site you're working at. It may be 20 minutes. It may be a few minutes. I had a health emergency last year. I called the ambulance about 2 a.m. They were here at my place in 5 minutes. When I lived in the Northeast Kingdom, it would have been a half an hour. And the results you get are kind of different depending on that kind of response time. So know what your response time is going to be at your work site. Have a plan in place to either get workers first aid until those EMTs arrived, or have some sort of plan in place, because and even aside from heat, you need to have that in your safety and health management system anyway. If you are working outdoors and doing just tree maintenance, you need to have a plan for what's going to happen if somebody gets hurt. If you're doing construction, you need to have a plan based off the response time of emergency personnel. If you're working in manufacturing, same thing. So know your response time of your local employer in EMTs. All right. So we have the heat app from OSHA and NIOSH. It's been out for a couple of years now, but this newest iteration is actually really a good app. I'm really kind of psyched about it. It actually does cool stuff. You can download it easily at either the Android store or the Apple store, and it's free. Just look for OSHA heat safety app. It comes in, basically the screen is slightly wrong now. They've switched it from on the screen five levels of heat awareness down to they changed it to 3. So a caution, a warning, and a danger. But at each of those levels, it gives you advice on precautions to take. You can look up all this. It'll show you all the symptoms on all those illnesses I went over. It actually has the first aid for all those symptoms that I went over, so you can look it up on your phone. It's real easy. It does, if you're in cell range, it will tell you the heat index at the spot you're at. And you can also plan for your day, because it'll show the predicted heat index throughout the day. It has the ability in there now to set alarms. So say you want your guys drinking water every 30 minutes. You can set an alarm, and every 30 minutes it'll go off, and you can tell your people to drink. You can set it for 15 minutes and an hour as well. So whatever frequency you want people drinking and resting. As a reminder to your foreman or supervisors, or just to have your workers set it on their own phones so they know to keep that hydration schedule in at the forefront of their mind, because you get to work and you forget to drink, and sometimes you're actually not thirsty, even though you should be drinking. So you should be drinking on pick a schedule based on their workload. Have them drink repeatedly along that schedule. It does, what else does it do? It does a couple of things. It is, like I said, it does, it'll tell you throughout the day where you expect the heat to go. It'll tell you symptoms. It will tell you first aid. It also does a couple other things. So has contact information for OSHA, so you can directly contact them. Let's see, has tips for being prepared in emergencies. Goes over the risk factors for people. Lets you set reminders. And like today on my phone, right now it's 68 degrees Fahrenheit with the humidity. But then if you go to the hourly and thumb through the day, it's not going to get anywhere close to a heat emergency day. Matter of fact, it's going to go really nice tonight and be at 54 degrees. So we're not going to be having a problem today. But I highly recommend downloading it. It is actually way more useful than it used to be. If you've looked at it in the past, it actually has a lot of functionality, and it can help you with this whole compliance bit.
Hey, Carl.
Yes, sir.
This is Dan. Hey, I don't think that the heat app accounts for inside heat. I think it.
No, it's only out. Yeah, it's
outside
only.
heat. So
yep.
If you're a manufacturing facility or a restaurant or something like that, it's a good guide. It'll let you know when it's hot outside, but it doesn't account for inside heat. So you want to be sure that you're thinking about that if your workplace is inside. And also it doesn't account for exertional exposure. So if you've got folks that are really doing heavy tasks, it may not, it may show a level of exposure to be low, but because of the exertional exposure, your folks might actually be more exposed to heat illness. So those are two cautions. Very good app, though. I have it on my phone. Very good app and a good guide.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Dan. I didn't even think to mention that. Yes, it doesn't cover indoor temperatures. You should have some sort of thermometer inside if you are, say, a hot kitchen or you make cheese like I used to, that keeps track of the temperature. And the same with the you need to, as part of your hazard analysis, evaluate the strenuosity of the work that you're going to be doing. So if you're really putting out a lot of calories, you're going to be adding to your issue. And so you want to, that's where the hazard analysis comes in and picking what kind of work rest regimen you're going to use. So you have basically, depending on who you are, where you work, you always have the right to contact us and or talk to your employer about safety and health risks without the fear of retaliation. And you can find other resources. All the OSHA.gov has a bunch of heat resources. NIOSH has a bunch of heat resources. CDC has a bunch of heat resources. Your local health department probably has some as well. So there's a plenty out there for you guys to help you guys out. There's published heat work rest charts from the Army that are really good. There's a ton of different work rest plans out there that you can look at and see which one you might think fits your type of business and work best. So we expect you to do an analysis of your work, pick some sort of mitigation plan for heat when you get to that 80-degree mark in heat index. And pretty much that's it. I mean, do we have any questions out there? I'm looking through the chat.
Hey, Carl, while you're looking through the chat, I just thought I'd chime in a little bit. So some of the things that Carl talked about with, planning for heat, I think that's the big thing is to really plan your work activities out and make sure that employees understand the hazards of heat. Because I think, um, you know, because we have a limited means to acclimatize our people because of we don't run into a lot of heat. Some employees may not recognize those early symptoms when we can, intervene and not have it turn into a medical emergency where, we might be able to just cool someone down and rest them and give them some fluids and let them recover. So you want to make sure that you're really training employees to recognize those symptoms, especially younger workers. Younger workers tend to jump in and, working up a sweat is part of the deal for them. Older workers tend to be more aware of that. So you're going to want to really pay attention to that and have a written plan. Have a good, just like your lockout tagout, your HAZCOM plan, have a good written plan on how to deal with heat and the tasks that are identified, that do incur that level of exposure. So those are some things. Definitely OSHA is coming out with a heat standard. A few states already have a standard. I expect that standard to be probably, I'm going to say about this fallish time frame. And of course, fall and winter in Vermont is not exactly known for heat exposure. But we do have some historical knowledge that we can work with. So make sure that you're thinking back to last summer when everybody was sweating and you were buying coolers of water and things like that. So, use some historical knowledge and develop a good plan. Depending on what it is you do for a business, develop a good plan.
And Sully's question was regarding a written plan. So yes, we do expect eventually everybody to have a written plan. In the interim, if you don't have one in your safety and health management system, throw together something quick. You can do, like I said, a toolbox talk type thing and write that down. We're going to have water here. We're going to have shade here. We're going to call this number for emergency services. I'm going to get, we're going to get training on symptoms here. You can do an interim thing easily enough, but in the long run, we expect you to have, as part of your safety and health management system, a written plan. And that will probably be part of the standard when it's out.
Yeah, absolutely it will. And, the purpose of this NEP is to allow employers to, to kind of learn the ins and outs of the heat standard. There's a tremendous amount of information. I put up a couple of links. I see Andy Blount has put up a link as well. There's a lot of information out there. There's some really great quick cards and pamphlets, really short, easy reading that can reach employees. There's multiple languages that are available. So there's a lot of stuff out there to allow people to get used to this because it is going to be a standard. And it's a standard that because of climate change, OSHA is placing a high priority on. So, when we do hit the ground, we're going to hit the ground running. So we're hoping that people will take this time, especially now that we're granted a little reprieve and cool weather, to take this time to really take a look at this and ask the questions. Call Carl, call Project WorkSafe, call myself. I put my email address in the chat. If you have any questions, we're here to answer those questions and get that information out.
And it's also for anything at all, call us. That's one of the things we'd rather have you call and ask us about a safety question than come in and bust you for being wrong. If you can get the info ahead of time, definitely get it. So we had a lot more people sign up for this than actually showed up, it looks like, but hopefully everybody got something out of it.
Obviously, like Carl said, if we hang up on the meeting and you have questions down the road, don't be afraid to reach out to us. We'll do whatever we can to get out the information.
All right. Don't see any other questions coming in. Any last call for questions, or just email them in if you don't want to ask them in chat. Again, Dan, me, Project WorkSafe are all available. Oops, somebody's asking something. Look, I don't think we missed any. Doesn't look like we missed any questions in chat. Looks like
I think we're good to go, Carl.
okay. Bob Shed's typing something, but let's see. Do we think we'll be making time limit decisions on working in the heat? I don't think so. I doubt there will be. What we expect is you guys to come up with a work rest regimen and decide at what point you don't want your guys out in the heat. So depending on what they're actually doing, like when I worked for the gold mining company, got up to 115 some days, and we would try and be out of the field and back into a shady area before it hit like 105, just to be safe. And so we'd start work as barely you could see, just to try and get some actual large chunk of work in before it got that hot on those days. And then eventually somebody idiot started a fire and ran us out of there completely. But there will be a link. Yes. There will be a link. Kyle will send out a link to everybody who registered on this with this presentation.
And I think we may put a link on the website as well, on the VOSHA
Yes.
website.
Yes, we will be. So the VOSHA website will have a link to it, and then Kyle's going to send a link to all the registered participants, so they have it as well. So I think we'll call that good. Thanks everybody for attending.